LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the March 1st edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup from Sacramento County, location of the first case of the coronavirus community transmission in the United States. Thanks for joining me. This is actually just a joke. You don't need to wear these even here in Sacramento. They actually don't really help stop transmission of the virus, but I just thought I would start off. It's actually because of Dash and Sandy that I have these masks that I use when I try to shampoo the carpet from all the times they pee on the carpet. So that's what that mask is really for. But I thought I would welcome you with the coronavirus news story is the main story going viral. And if you like what I'm doing, you can give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel tonight. Tonight I have the 14 best, most newsworthy clips that I've picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really educational, fair use, media criticism, and political commentary show for you all tonight. There's also a link down in the video description to my clip list. You can look at my notes of my 14 clips. There's Dash and Sandy. I have a Dash and Sandy clip for you at the end, and I will also at the end be telling you about a video I will be doing tomorrow. Hold on, I forgot to make this so I can, here you go. This is my California ballot that I have not yet filled out. The second topic I'm doing is Joe Biden's comeback and talking about the Democratic race. That's my California ballot. I will be filling that out and telling you who I voted for tomorrow. I will be doing either a live stream or a premiere video where I show who I voted for, and I also explain how I worked on this First Amendment case. My LiberalViewer channel was actually mentioned in a California case trying to give people the right to broadcast who they have voted for, even from when they go to their voting places, but that's something for tomorrow. I will talk a little bit about the Democratic contest in the second part of my show. The first part is mostly, there's actually a mix. When I get to the news summaries, there'll be a mix of both the virus story and the Joe Biden comeback story. But I'm going to start with Saturday Night Live last night. Their cold open was actually a mixture of those two topics. They started with Mike Pence, a parody of Mike Pence doing his press conference on the coronavirus, and then interrupted by all sorts of Democratic candidates, including Bernie Sanders. So I've edited together Mike Pence at the beginning with a Bernie Sanders clip that actually shows some of the problems that Bernie Sanders has been having. Well, first it shows one good thing showed up in the Saturday Night Live cold open is that Bernie Sanders, his thing about the top 1%, that is such a big part of his brand that it showed up in this Larry David parody of Bernie Sanders. But then it also, I think they showed a little bit about something that's been giving him trouble since last Sunday. Right after I did my broadcast, he did this 60 Minutes interview where something came up that I will talk about after we watch that clip together over here.
Thank you all for coming. I'm Vice President Mike Pence. Most of you know me from the sentence, even if Trump was removed, we'd still be stuck with Mike Pence. President Trump has put me in charge of the coronavirus, even though I don't believe in science. And I have to admit, this disease has been quite a test of my faith, just like dinosaur bones or Timothy Chalamet.
No Purell. I got a bottle of that junk, and on the label, it says it kills 99.99% of germs. What happens to the top 0.01%? Why are we protecting them? I say enough with the potions. Just use good old-fashioned bar soap and scalding hot water. Now, I might get in trouble for saying this, but you know who was great at washing his hands? Joseph Stalin. Just saying.
Joseph Stalin, yeah, that was the Saturday Night Live parody of last Sunday's 60 Minutes that actually aired after I did my live stream, where Bernie Sanders got into some trouble with his, praise of Castro's literacy programs that he doubled down on when he did a CNN interview the following day. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly how much negative, how much of a problem that's going to be for Bernie Sanders. I mean, he sticks to his beliefs. I think he is a very honest candidate, unlike Donald Trump. I've gotten into some arguments with people on the right because of all of his, promises for all these big spending programs. They think that he's a con man. People like I've argued with a bunch of people on the right on Twitter. If you follow me on Twitter, you can go and see who I'm talking about. But and I don't understand that. They never ask how much the wars are going to cost and how they're going to pay for it before they go to the wars. But when it comes to Medicare for All, where also if you follow me on Facebook or Twitter, you'll see I posted a Yale study that was in the Lancet just last month in February, where they found that Medicare for All saves $450 billion per year, in addition to 68,000 lives per year, which Bernie Sanders actually mentioned that study in the last debate. But anyway, I'm going off on a big tangent here. I just wanted to get a little bit of the antidote to the Bernie Sanders Stalinism that showed up in the end of that Saturday Night Live clip. And now I'm going to get to the news summaries. I have 4 of them from NBC, CNN, ABC, and Fox News. They all have various mixtures of the virus story and the Joe Biden comeback story. One thing I've noticed that a lot of the networks seem to really want to raise up Joe Biden as a challenger to Bernie Sanders, and have been a little bit unfair to Bernie Sanders in their coverage, I thought. But I think they're fairly even-handed in their coverage of South Carolina if you don't put it in a greater context. We've had 2 caucuses and 2 primaries that have awarded, I believe it's 4% of the delegates. 2 days from now, another 34% of the delegates are going to be awarded. Like, California alone has more delegates than all 4 contests that have happened already. And so, in some ways, focusing on South Carolina or all 4 of these contests as a way to, Pete Buttigieg just dropped out right before I was listening to his withdrawal speech right before I started the program here. And it's kind of amazing that I guess if they can't keep the money they don't have the money in the organization to keep going forward, but dropping out 2 days before Super Tuesday, I don't know. That you'll see Pete Buttigieg shows up in several of these news summaries. I'll start with the NBC news summary from Meet the Press. Chuck Todd does his introduction about both South Carolina, Super Tuesday, and the virus, talking about Biden and Sanders. And I think, like I said, if you don't, other than the fact that they concentrate too much on South Carolina as this, huge event when it's a very small percentage and only 2 days worth of momentum until Super Tuesday. Well, some of them talk about that a little bit, and I will talk about that a little more. Actually, Fox News talks about that in the 4th news summary. This is the first one for Meet the Press that I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning from our election headquarters right here at Rockefeller Center in New York City. We have so much to talk about. Yesterday's South Carolina primary, our look ahead to Super Tuesday, and of course the growing fears over the coronavirus, which has now claimed its first victim in the United States. So let's get right to it. We're going to start with presidential politics. While he's not yet the comeback kid, Joe Biden got the win he so desperately needed yesterday. Biden's South Carolina firewall held and then some, with almost all the votes counted. Joe Biden lapped the field with 48% of the vote, winning every single county in the state, crushing Bernie Sanders by more than a 2-to-1 margin, with everyone else trailing badly. Biden's big win helped him close the delegate gap considerably with Sanders. With 6 South Carolina delegates still to be allocated, it's very close.
Just days ago, the press and the pundits have declared this candidacy dead. Now, thanks to all of you, the heart of the Democratic Party, we just won, and we've won big because of you.
Despite Biden's big night, the confetti could stop for him on Super Tuesday, as Sanders is much better organized and positioned to take a potentially commanding delegate lead.
The people of this country on Super Tuesday and after are going to support our campaign because we are more than a campaign, we are a movement.
14 states plus American Samoa and Democrats abroad will be voting on Tuesday, with 1,357 pledged delegates at stake, or 34% of the entire total available. It is a national primary day, folks. Biden still needs lower-tier candidates to drop out, as Tom Steyer did last night, and we'll have much more in the race in a moment. The other big story, of course, is the coronavirus. Yesterday, we learned of the first death of someone in the United States as a result of the outbreak. This person had no known travel exposure. I spoke with Vice President Mike Pence, who's leading the government's response effort, and you'll see that interview later in the show. But we're going to begin with the Democratic race and the big shakeup here. Perhaps no one had more riding on South Carolina or has more riding on Super Tuesday than Joe Biden, and the former Vice President joins me now from a Super Tuesday.
And I will have a couple Joe Biden clips, I'll have a couple Bernie Sanders clips, I'll have a couple Mike Pence clips that you can compare to the Beck Bennett parody of Mike Pence I showed in the first clip. But before I get to all those news, and I'll have a couple Alex Azar clips. I think that is all the clips. Like 2 Mike Pences, 2 Bernie Sanders, 2 Joe Bidens, and 2 Alex Azars, and 3 more news summaries. The next news summary is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I think they, at least, in my opinion, I think the virus story comes before the South Carolina story. That might just be because I'm here in Sacramento County, where we had the first community transmission, apparently, from it was someone in Solano County who is now at UC Davis Medical Center here in Sacramento. That's actually where my daughter was born, is where this patient is with the coronavirus, and maybe that makes me a little more sensitive, but I think there are a lot more cases out there once they get the testing out there, and I think in the long run it's going to be a bigger story than South Carolina, although South Carolina might legitimately be part of Joe Biden's comeback. I'm not so sure whether he's going to end up being the alternative to Bernie Sanders. Someone's probably going to end up being the alternative, and with Pete Buttigieg dropping out, and I suppose it could be Michael Bloomberg, though his debate performance has been really poor, but he's put a lot of money into the Super Tuesday states. And anyway, I'm going to show you one more news summary. This one's, the next news summary, which is much shorter, about 1 minute and 14 seconds, I think it is. And I think that whole long intro was to say that I think they at least put the virus South Carolina Super Tuesday story in the right order, which I will, I guess Jake Tapper does start off with the state of, I'm sorry, am I confusing the CNN and the ABC one? Yeah, the next one's CNN. I'm sorry, it's the ABC one that puts it in the right order. That's coming clip after next. The next one is CNN State of the Union, where they do talk about both stories, but they also, like NBC, put the political story, the South Carolina story, before the virus story, which I think is the wrong order, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is competitive. Former Vice President Joe Biden's sweeping victory in South Carolina yesterday, that's the first state to vote with a sizable African-American population, helps him make the case to Democrats that he, not Senator Bernie Sanders, can turn out the votes that Democrats would need to beat President Trump in November. Next up, I'm going to speak with the former vice president, but we're going to begin this morning with the global health crisis, the spread of the coronavirus in the United States and throughout the world. The virus has now claimed the life of its first known American, a man in his 50s in Washington state. And more than 50 people in a long-term nursing facility there are experiencing symptoms of the virus and are being tested after 2 other people at that facility tested positive. The instinct of President Trump has clearly been to downplay concerns. He said this week that the number of cases have been, quote, going very substantially down, not up, unquote. But health experts say we should expect more cases. And there are serious questions being raised about how prepared the U.S. and the Trump administration are for this crisis. There is a dearth of viable testing kits, for example. I spoke with the man leading the coronavirus response, Vice President Mike Pence, about the likely spread of the disease.
And like I said, I will have a couple Mike Pence clips coming up. If you're following along on your clip list, that would be clip 8 and 9. But we just watched clip number 3, which was the second of my 4 news summaries. The third of the 4 news summaries is the one from ABC that I kind of introduced by mistake before the last one, where I was thinking that was the one where they had the news stories in the correct order. Well, this is the one where I believe ABC at least puts the news stories in the correct order. I don't know if that's really such a big deal, but it's a little bit longer, and then it does go more deeply, I guess, into the political story than the virus story, which, I don't know, I think CNN actually did a pretty good job, despite getting the order wrong, of giving some of the basic facts. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the ABC news clip together. George Stephanopoulos starting off the show over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. As we come on the air this morning, the new coronavirus continues to spread. Almost 90,000 cases across 60 countries and 6 continents. The first death reported here in the U.S. in the state of Washington, where they've declared a state of emergency amid concern that the virus has been spreading there for weeks. We're going to have more on that coming up. But we begin with the race for the White House and Joe Biden's comeback landslide in South Carolina. A commanding win thanks to overwhelming support from African-American voters who make up more than half the Democratic vote in South Carolina. Bernie Sanders and Tom Steyer far back, and Steyer has now dropped out of the race. The former vice president will come away from South Carolina with at least 36 pledged delegates. He now stands in second place behind Sanders in that all-important measure. But Sanders is poised to take home a treasure trove on Super Tuesday, just 2 days away. He's ahead in the biggest states, has a boatload of cash, and the most energized organization. The big question for Biden now, can he make this a two-person race and stop Sanders from getting an insurmountable lead in delegates? Biden framed the choice last night.
If the Democrats want a nominee who's a Democrat, an Obama-Biden Democrat, then join us. Folks, win big or lose, that's the choice. Most Americans don't want the promise of revolution. They want more than promises. They want results.
And Vice President Biden joins us this morning. Congratulations, Mr. Vice President.
More than congratulations. You notice they showed all those clips of Biden and didn't really talk much about Bernie, even though Bernie is still pretty much the putative front runner, I guess. Or I guess maybe it's a little bit odd that they talked about how Biden has to turn it into a two-man race, and then they kind of turned it into a two-man race with the ending of their news reporting there, at least in my opinion. And the final news summary I want to show is the Fox News summary, where now I thought that in that last clip, George Stephanopoulos did mention that Biden has a real problem with organization in the Super Tuesday states, and that comes up in the Fox News summary from Peter Doocy, of all people, the son of Steve Doocy of Fox and Friends fame, who cannot do a story that mentions Bernie Sanders without calling him Democratic Socialist Bernie Sanders, which you'll see here. But there are also some digs at Joe Biden, how he left New Hampshire, a grim leaving of New Hampshire to South Carolina, which paid off, which is kind of a backhanded compliment. And that's, anyway, pretty much my pre-criticism of the Fox News Sunday News Summary. Chris Wallace handing it over to Peter Doocy, talking about very little. Is there any mention of the coronavirus? Oh, yeah, he does start off with the two big stories, the coronavirus and the Democratic primary, but then spends a lot more time on the Democratic primary than the coronavirus, as I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
And And hello again from Fox News in Washington. We're covering two big stories this hour. First, growing fears over the spread of the coronavirus, including the nation's first death. The White House announcing new travel restrictions yesterday. We'll discuss all that with Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar later this hour. But we begin with politics. Joe Biden was the big winner in South Carolina last night. He beat Senator Bernie Sanders by a margin of more than 2-1. Tom Steyer, Pete Buttigieg, and Elizabeth Warren rounding out the top five. In a moment, we'll speak with the former vice president about his victory and what it means for his chances in the 14 states that vote on Super Tuesday. But first, let's bring in Peter Doocy with the latest from the Palmetto State and the race for the Democratic nomination. Peter.
Chris, this is the state where Joe Biden flew before the results from New Hampshire were even in because things were so grim for him there, and his gamble paid off.
My buddy Jim Clyburn, you brought me back.
And now Biden wants to be the alternative to Bernie Sanders.
Democrats want a nominee who's a Democrat.
The Democratic Socialist, Sanders, congratulated Biden last night.
There are a lot of states in this country. Nobody wins them all.
Iowa's winner, Pete Buttigieg, finished fourth in South Carolina.
I am proud of the votes we earned, and I am determined to earn every vote on the road ahead.
Tom Steyer's road ended in Columbia.
I can't see a path where I can win the presidency.
Dynamic debates haven't helped Elizabeth Warren anywhere, but she's staying in and trying to chip away at rivals like Biden.
This crisis demands more than a former vice president who is so eager to cut deals with Mitch McConnell and the Republicans that he'll trade good ideas for bad ones.
But for now, Biden's focus remains on Bernie.
Most Americans don't want the promise of revolution. They want more than promises. They want results.
Bernie Sanders used his 2 wins in February to raise more than $46 million in a month. Joe Biden has just 2 days to soak up his win here before more than a dozen more states host their contests on Super Tuesday. Chris?
Peter Doocy reporting from South Carolina. Peter, thank you.
And yeah, that was the one other good thing that I forgot to mention, that Peter Doocy actually put in his report about the short bounce of momentum from South Carolina before Super Tuesday. That actually is true. And that was the last of the news summaries. Now I have some newsmaker clips I want to show you. The next one is actually from Fox News Sunday, where I thought that Chris Wallace, despite the Fox News bias I talked about in that last story, I thought Chris Wallace did a fairly good job of questioning the Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar about this whistleblower complaint. That was, there's this first community transmission case of the coronavirus here in Sacramento. Actually happened in Solano County, where there's this air base, Travis Air Force Base, where a whole bunch of coronavirus refugees were brought in and quarantined. And then there was this whistleblower complaint saying that a whole bunch of Health and Human Services workers were brought in without being properly trained and without the proper protective equipment. So they were just like greeting people coming off of the airplane who may or may not have been sick. They were people who were exposed but not necessarily sick or not necessarily infected with the coronavirus. But it was, so the whistleblower talked about how these people didn't get the training or the equipment, and then they just like went off into the community. And Solano County, where this community transmission case took place, the person who's now in Sacramento County at UC Davis Hospital, that's where Travis Air Force Base is. So there's some suspicion that this mistake by the administration may have caused this community transmission. But according to what Alex Azar tells Chris Wallace in his answer to this next question, that's not true, because none of those HHS workers ended up getting infected, so they couldn't have passed it on to some random person in Solano County who is now sick, so kudos to Chris Wallace for actually making news and getting this answer from Alex Azar that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
A whistleblower in your department raised a concern about a number, I think a dozen HHS workers who were apparently sent to receive the first evacuees from China, she says, without proper gear, without proper training, and she raised this concern. I know you say you're investigating, but that woman, was she reassigned, as she claims, after she raised this concern?
So first, it is vitally important that we protect our employees in any situation. It is vitally important that we follow the appropriate isolation or quarantine protocols in dealing with individuals. And it's important that no whistleblower ever be retaliated against, and we will never permit retaliation against a whistleblower. Let me give you the facts that we know so far. First, every HHS employee who was involved in the allegations in the whistleblower's complaint has now been well over 14 days from any interaction with individuals, and nobody is symptomatic or has the disease. So there was no risk. There's no risk to the people of HHS, no risk to the community, even if the allegations prove to be true. So that's a very important fact. We also have offered voluntary testing to our employees. It's not medically indicated because they don't have the virus, but if it comforts them, we're going to get them tested so they know.
But what happened to the woman? Was she reassigned? She has said more than 10 days ago that she was reassigned. You certainly know whether that happened.
Well, I'm not going to discuss personnel matters. That wouldn't be proper for me to do, but there will be no retaliation against this individual or any other individual. We are grateful. If our employees raise concerns about our processes, if something proves not to be right, we are grateful for that.
So if she was reassigned, I know you can't discuss it. If she was reassigned because of raising this complaint, you're saying she'll be restored to the position?
Nobody would ever be reassigned or discriminated against or prejudiced or retaliated against because of raising concerns about the functioning of the department.
And you can't tell me whether that happened?
I'm not going to tell you whether that happened because that's still under investigation. We are doing a comprehensive, thorough investigation.
Secretary Azar, thank you. Thanks for coming in today.
So apparently the Trump administration does not retaliate against whistleblowers, which of course, after the whole impeachment trial or trial without witnesses, but the impeachment hearings did have witnesses, many of whom were retaliated against as whistleblowers. So that's a little bit disingenuous in the second part. But like I said, good job with Chris Wallace at least getting Alex Azar to commit to the lack of retaliation against whistleblowers, whether it's true or not. And I also never can tell with Trump administration officials, should I believe what he said in the first part? Is it now definitely true that this screw up with the HHS workers did not lead to the community transmission in Solano County because none of them got sick, and that's what the Secretary of HHS is telling us? And why would he lie? Why would he lie? Well, I don't know. I don't know if I can trust it, but if it's true, at least it's good news. You can let me know what you think, if we can trust Alex Azar on that one. This other controversy that Alex Azar got asked about on, this is the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos clip with Alex Azar. The only, I think, of the 5 shows to ask, and there were representatives of the administration, either Alex Azar or Mike Pence, I think one of them was on all of the shows, and George Stephanopoulos was the only one to play this clip that was going around the internet hot and heavy Friday night and Saturday about Trump claiming the coronavirus was a hoax, and then all the people on the right wing were saying, oh, this is fake news. He never said coronavirus was a hoax. He said the Democrats blaming Trump for the coronavirus was the hoax. If you'll see here that George Stephanopoulos actually plays a clip from his rally where he says, this is their new hoax, and it depends on what this is referring to. And actually, knowing Trump as I do, I think when he uses the word hoax, what he's talking about is other people holding him accountable for bad things he's done. That's what hoaxes are to Donald Trump. And so I think actually he didn't mean coronavirus was a hoax. I think what he meant was the criticism from Democrats about his handling of the coronavirus is the hoax, because that's what hoaxes are to him. It's accountability. When he's held accountable for doing things wrong, that's always a hoax. And so at least I'll give Trump that at least. But here's Alex Azar responding, the HHS secretary responding to George Stephanopoulos, asking him about whether using the word hoax is even a good idea anywhere near the word coronavirus. And anyway, I'll talk about that clip with you after we watch together over here.
Now the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. One of my people came up to me and said, Mr. President, they tried to beat you on Russia. That didn't work out too well. They couldn't do it. They tried the impeachment hoax. That was on a perfect conversation. And this is their new hoax.
President Trump in South Carolina on Friday night. We're now joined by one of his point people to fight the virus, the Health and Human Services Secretary, Alex Azar. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us this morning. I know the president said he was talking about the Democrats' response there, but is it appropriate for him in any way to be using the word hoax in the context of this crisis?
Well, he's talking about the partisan sniping that we're seeing, and it's unnecessary. We don't need to have this made a political issue. We're in a public health crisis here. We need to all be banding together. And, we're working on this emergency supplemental bill in Congress, and we're getting bipartisan support on that. So I've got a lot of hope that we can get things back to us all working together on this. And most important thing is that we're all communicating to the American people so they understand what we're dealing with, that the risk to any individual American's low, that we've been working to keep it low. We're going to see more cases. We're seeing some community spreading, but they've got the finest public health system in the world and the finest public health experts who are on it. This is what we do.
I want to put up the CDC definition of a pandemic up on the screen right now.
So, yeah, that, like I said, is Alex Azar responding to the whole coronavirus criticism is a hoax charge from Donald Trump, and did he do a good job? I don't know. I mean, he certainly did a better job than Donald Trump does, so that's a pretty low bar. And speaking of clearing that low bar, the next two clips I have are of our Vice President, Mike Pence. As Beck Bennett said in the first clip I showed, that you can compare to the actual Mike Pence, that you may know me from hearing the phrase, oh, even if we get rid of Trump, we're still left with Mike Pence. And one thing, Mike Pence was on multiple shows and nobody asked him, being put in charge of the coronavirus, about his past problems with the HIV outbreak in Indiana, where he refused to allow needle exchanges to stop the HIV outbreak until this 130-day thing that he did. But no one asked him about that on the Sunday shows. No one asked him about the whole problem that where he wrote this blog entry, or wrote this blog or some sort of online thing in the year 2000 saying that cigarettes don't cause cancer. And I won't even go into the whole pray away the gay thing, but none of that came up in these interviews. Though, the hardest hitting questioning you'll see is these next two clips, one from NBC and one from CNN, where they talk about this ridiculous thing that Alex Azar sort of talked about there, which is the Republicans and Trump himself saying, totally politicizing this, attacking Democrats, crying Chuck Schumer and nervous Nancy Pelosi, and within a couple of minutes of saying, don't politicize it. And it's really the Republicans who are doing more politicizing than Democrats, I think. But I'll show you two different ways that Mike Pence tried to answer this question. First, here's NBC News' Meet the Press, where actually, Chuck Todd gets a lot of crap for not being a good interviewer, not following up and questioning, and I would criticize him for not bringing up any of those issues I mentioned earlier about the HIV needle exchange and the pray away the gay and the whole thing with cigarettes don't cause cancer. None of that came up. But when Mike Pence tries to make this ridiculous argument that Alex Azar kind of did, and Mike Pence does in both his answers about, you always hear Trump say, oh, well, Trump is a counterpuncher. He's not a total asshole jerk who's attacking people and criticizing them all the time. He's just responding to the negativity of others. Chuck Todd, I think, follows it. Well, who exactly? Name names. So good job, Chuck Todd, for asking that question of our vice president in the clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
Being of the American people.
You've gone out of your way since you've been appointed to this to try to keep this from getting politicized. You have made every effort, every statement. But I want to play for you what some of your allies have said about the coronavirus. Here's including the president's son and the RNC chair. Take a listen, sir.
The coronavirus being weaponized as yet another element to bring down Donald Trump.
Democrats are using this for their political gain to try and stoke fear in the American people, which is shameful, wrong, and I think un-American.
For them to try to take a pandemic and seemingly hope that it comes here and kills millions of people so that they could end Donald Trump's streak of winning is a new level of sickness.
None of this seems to match the facts. What facts are there that Democrats are doing this?
Well,
it seems like people are asking questions and they're concerned about the virus. This implies some sort of political motivation, which is kind of gross.
Well, I will tell you, there's been a lot of irresponsible rhetoric among Democrats and commentators.
Who is this?
On the left.
Name some names, sir.
Well,
because this is just, it just feels like gaslighting. Please name some names. We're all big.
Well,
we're all big people here. Name some names.
There was a column in the New York Times that by a prominent liberal journalist that said we should rename it the Trump virus.
Okay, does that apply to all people?
So that the president would be blamed. Chuck, this virus began in China.
Why take this? Here's what I ask you. This doesn't help. This does not help.
Decisive action to protect the American people, and when you see voices on our side pushing back on outrageous and irresponsible rhetoric on the other side, I think that's important.
Do you think this rhetoric from your side helps?
I never begrudge people responding to unwarranted, unjustified attacks. But I promise you, we're going to continue to focus on the mission the president's given this task force and given this government, and that is we're going to bring the full resources of the federal government to bear. And the American people can be confident that we're going to continue to work this issue. We're going to work with leaders in both parties in Congress to make sure that not only our federal agencies have all the resources they need, but our state and local governments, healthcare providers have the resources and the support to provide the care that every American would want. Remember, Chuck, this is about the lives of the American people.
And you can see
Oh, and he's saying that you can see his whole Mike Pence interview on meetthepress.com, I believe is. There are links down in the video description to the sources of all my clips, including Meet the Press, where you can see, I guess, the longer interview with Mike Pence, and even longer than I watched on Meet the Press when I watched the program this morning. But like I said, that was a good job from Chuck Todd to ask him who it was who Trump or who Rush Limbaugh and Don Jr., who are they counterpunching against? Who are they responding to? Who are the terrible rhetoric blaming Trump? I mean, there was a whistleblower, that whole HHS thing, and there's some criticism of the Trump response. He did fire the National Security Council team that responds to pandemics, and I'll show you Joe Biden making that point in just a couple clips. But the one thing I think Chuck Todd, he did follow up at the beginning pretty quickly, but then he let Mike Pence, pivot into the bullshit. That is a great tactic of long-time politicians. They have their talking points, all the great things we're doing. We're bringing everyone together. I'm talking to all the right people. I'm doing all the right things. I'm concerned about the health of the American people, and you'll see that pivot in this next answer, but I think Jake Tapper actually does a better job. He doesn't show the Romney McDaniel, the head of the GOP, the Republican Party clip. He doesn't show the Rush Limbaugh clip, but he does show the Don Jr. clip to Mike Pence, and he gets pretty much the same answer, but I think he does a better job of doing a follow-up question about Don Jr.'s partisanship and what he means by it after Mike Pence pivots to the bullshit in his answer to pretty much the same question on CNN's State of the Union this morning that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Very energetically to accomplish that.
So I do want to ask you a political question about this, even though I see it primarily as a health issue. There's been a lot of unfortunate rhetoric on the left and on the right about the coronavirus. I want you to take a listen to something that the president's son, Don Jr., said about Democrats and the coronavirus just on Friday.
Anything that they can use to try to hurt Trump, they will. But for them to try to take a pandemic and seemingly hope that it comes here and kills millions of people so that they could end Donald Trump's streak of winning is a new level of sickness.
Can we agree that neither Democrats nor Republicans want Americans to get the coronavirus and die from it? I mean, that does seem like it seems like very extreme rhetoric. I don't expect you to criticize the president's son, but you don't think that Democrats want people to contract this disease, do you?
Well, I think what the president said earlier this week, and his charge to me, is to remind the American people that the risk is low, to assure the American people that we're ready, but also to say, as the president said, this is no time for politics. And frankly, I think that was Don Jr.'s point, that there has been some very strong rhetoric directed at the president by some members of Congress and
you don't think that was strong rhetoric?
Well,
he said seemingly Democrats want millions of Americans to die of coronavirus.
But responding to the kind of things that have been hurled is understandable. But what the president's charged us to do, in my conversations with Speaker Pelosi, with Senator Schumer, my conversations with Republican and Democrat governors, is to set the politics aside on this and to work the problem. And I want to assure your viewers that's exactly what we're doing. And with the exception of some barbs being thrown by some of the predictable voices in the public debate on the left, the usual shots the president will take,
I've heard some from the right also, with respect, sir. I've heard some, not from you, but I've heard some from the right.
Well, look, what I'm telling you is that this is really a time for us to come together. Because remember, we're talking about the health and lives of the American people. You know, I spoke on the phone last night to Jerry Goldman. She is the wife of Carl Goldman. And I caught her on a great night because she'd just gotten a blood test back. She'd been in quarantine for several weeks. She got a clean bill of health. She's going home, back to their small business. And she told me Carl's doing great, but he's still got a ways to go before they allow him to go on home and be back in his community. I mean, we're talking about real Americans dealing with the coronavirus. And I think it really is a time. It really is a time for us to look for ways to come together. And I have to tell you, Jake, the conversations that I'm having with leaders in the Congress, the conversations I'm having with, frankly, Democrat and Republican governors around the country gives me great hope that as we move forward, and in the wake of the tragic news of this weekend of the loss of an American life, I continue to believe that we have an opportunity to come together to make sure all of our agencies have the resources that they need, all of our states have the resources that they need, and with the proper expertise, the proper resources, and the prayers of millions of Americans, we're going to get through this.
One last question, sir, and it's on the same topic.
You know, I don't know, maybe I take my analysis back. That I watch these clips 3 times. Once when I watch the show, once when I capture the clip, and then the 3rd time I watch them with you. You know, I put my earpiece in so I can hear the audio, and I watch the clip and sometimes I read your comments while we're watching it together. And before I showed that clip, I said that Jake Tapper did a better job than Chuck Todd of corralling Mike Pence in when he pivoted to the bullshit. But no, he did that whole extra thing about talking to the, who was it, Carl Goldman, I believe it was. or the wife of Carl Goldman. That was a big pivot to the bullshit that Jake Tapper did not really rein in at all. So maybe I was wrong with that criticism of Chuck Todd versus Jake Tapper, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And I have one more clip on the virus topic before I have 3 clips on the Democratic candidate topic. But this is sort of a transitional clip because this is Joe Biden responding to a question from Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union about what Donald Trump has done wrong and what Joe Biden as president would do better in responding to the coronavirus. And I think he does make some good points. I don't know. I'm not voting for Joe Biden in the primary. I'm going to talk to you at the end about how I'm going to fill out this ballot here. But it's going to. As if you've been watching my live streams for the last several months, you know I've been trying to decide between voting for Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and I'll talk about that a little more at the end of the program. I'm not voting for Joe Biden, but I think he does do a good job of criticizing Trump's response to the coronavirus in the final going viral topic clip before I show my final 3 clips on. Is it 3 clips? No, 4 clips, because there are 3 Joe Biden clips and 2 Bernie Sanders clips. Not that you care, but anyway, here is Joe Biden talking to Jake Tapper about how he would do better than Trump at responding to the coronavirus. And I'll talk about that clip with you a little more after we watch together over here.
What's happening?
I'm curious as to your take on the administration's response to the coronavirus crisis. We just learned of the first American death from the disease yesterday. What, if anything, do you think you would be doing differently if you were president right now?
I know what I would have done differently. What we did in the Ebola crisis. You know, I heard Vice President say they set up an office in the White House. We had an office in the White House. We, after us dealing with a pandemic that could have been incredibly dangerous and affected the world, Ebola, we set up an entire mechanism as to how to deal with future outbreaks of pandemic diseases. They eliminated that office when they came in play. They cut the funding for CDC. They did not, in fact, want to keep they tried to cut the funding in terms of HHS. And so, look, here, we knew this was coming. We knew this was coming back as far as January. They didn't even begin to prepare the testing kits. I mean, this is something that's kind of elementary. We talked about testing kits. We're now going to get them. Well, I don't want to talk down the possibility of us being able to do this well. But, you know, the idea that Donald Trump said just several days ago this was a Democratic hoax, what in God's name is he talking about? What in God's name is he talking about? Has he no shame? We're in a situation where, I respect Vice President Pence and him being put in charge, but we should be hearing from the scientists. He mentions Fauci. Fauci's been there since Bush. All through presidents. We listened to him. He was a spokesperson. He was out in front. Let the scientists speak. Let them tell us what's going on. Let them prepare us. Let them prepare the country. Let them be the ones expanding how they're going to provide the protective gear for hospitals that are intake hospitals. And as you pointed out, Jake, the fact is that, you know, the other nations have had thousands of tests so far. What are we doing? Why are we just getting started? I would have not dismantled the organization we had put in place in the first place. I would have made sure we had American scientists in China, insisting we know what's happening in China. And I would be doing the same thing in Europe, where it's now spread. The idea that this is not a pandemic, that this is not worldwide, that it's not going to get worse, doesn't mean we're going to die, but it's going to get worse, is absolutely bizarre.
Mr. Vice President, stick around. We've got lots more to talk about next. We're going to squeeze in a quick break. Stay with us.
And like I said, I thought that was a really good answer from Joe Biden, a really presidential answer. Joe Biden looked good, and his criticisms of Trump's response to the coronavirus were real and specific and based on his experience responding to Ebola, and that was a great answer from Joe Biden. I'm not voting for Joe Biden in the primary. If he ends up being the Democratic nominee, I will definitely be voting for Joe Biden against Donald Trump. But that really good answer is not all that we see from Joe Biden. He had a good debate, the last debate, but he's had a lot of bad debates, and he hasn't spent a lot of time on the Sunday morning news shows. He just started showing up in the last couple weeks, and this morning he showed up on a few news shows, and he had good answers like that one, but I want to show you an answer he had on Fox News Sunday talking to Chris Wallace, where Chris Wallace kind of followed up on there's a little bit of a Sleepy Joe nickname questioning here. You know, that's what Donald Trump, he's got Crazy Bernie and Sleepy Joe. That's supposedly Donald Trump's superpower, that he can give people nicknames that stick and give them, bring them down and give them more negativity in terms of people's perceptions. And so it's Crazy Bernie and Sleepy Joe. I don't actually think that's Donald Trump's superpower. I think Donald Trump's superpower is that he has no shame. He can say one thing and say another within 60 seconds and have no shame in terms of being dishonest. He can almost do anything. Shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, as they say, and have no shame. That's anyway. But another tangent. But like I said, that was a good answer from Joe Biden. This next answer, where he's responding to basically the Sleepy Joe nickname from Donald Trump, Chris Wallace asks him about this story he tells about getting arrested trying to see Nelson Mandela with Andrew Young, which isn't true, and then follows up with this whole thing about where he says he's running for the Senate instead of running for the presidency, and doesn't even ask him about where he says vote for the other Biden. I don't even know what the other Biden is. And Joe Biden has good answers to both the questions, and then he kind of messes it up at the end for a reason that, well, becomes really clear, and I will discuss with you after we watch that second of 3 Joe Biden clips together. This is the final Fox News Sunday clip over here.
To do that. Mr. Vice President, I don't especially like asking you about this, but it is an issue in the campaign, and that has...
Before I show this clip, Chris Wallace starts off saying, I don't especially like asking you these Sleepy Joe Biden clip questions, but do you really believe that? Do you really think he doesn't like asking these questions? I think he lives to ask these questions. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section as we watch that clip together over here.
Mr. Vice President, I don't especially like asking you about this, but it is an issue in the campaign, and that has been your sometimes shaky performance on the campaign trail. Here's a story that you told at least 3 times about Nelson Mandela. Take a look.
I had the great honor of meeting him. I had the great honor of being arrested with our UN ambassador on the streets of Soweto trying to get to see him on Robbins Island.
You now say you weren't arrested and it didn't happen in Soweto. You were at the airport in Johannesburg and you were stopped from going through the door for blacks. I guess the question is, were you confused or were you just trying to embellish a story?
No. No, what I was doing was talking about the fact that I was strongly opposed to apartheid. When we landed we were going to Soweto, actually. We landed in Johannesburg, and the Afrikaners took me off the plane, took me in one direction, wanted me to go through a white-only door, and in fact, I wouldn't move. I said everybody else is going through another door. I'm going with the black delegation that I came with. They said, no, you can't. And I said, well, I'm standing here. I'm not going
going to move, and they would not let me move anywhere. So I guess I should have said I was detained. I was not able to move forward. So what they finally did was they went out and they cleared out a baggage claim area, took us all up through the baggage claim area up and cleared out a restaurant. Look, and if anybody wonders whether or not what I said about my desire and my adamancy about apartheid, you've covered it. Go back and look at JoeBiden.com and take a look at what's happened in the.
Your record is clear.
Anyway.
Let me ask you, though, here's something else you said this week. Take a look.
I'm a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. Look me over. If you like what you see, help out. If not, vote for the other guy. Give me a look, though, okay?
You haven't run for the Senate since 2008. What happened there?
No, the context was, I said to everybody, I said, look, I'm going to say the same thing that I've always said. Like I used to campaign in Delaware. I'd say, I'd knock on the door. I'd say, my name is Joe Biden, Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. Look me over. If you like me, help me out. If not, vote for the other guy. That's a sentence I repeated throughout making the case. And I said, and I'm here now to ask you all to look me over. It was in the context of how I said I ran, because the context was that, as was pointed out by Cedric and others on my campaign, and how I ran when I ran for the Senate, was people will not, they expect you to ask them. You have to earn their vote. That was the context of that.
All right. Final question in this regard. President Trump went after you about this at CPAC yesterday. Take a look at what he said.
Joe's not going to be running the government. He's just going to be sitting in a home someplace. And people are going to be running it for him.
Your response to the president.
Is that the stable genius saying that? Oh, give me a break. God love him. I'm going to resist saying what I feel like saying.
No, go ahead. Don't resist it. Go ahead, Mr. Vice President.
No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to try to, assign names and insults to the stable genius. This is a guy who doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know how to run the country. He is making us more unsafe the way he's responding to the coronavirus. He has done virtually nothing well that I can see, and so I can hardly wait to debate him on stage. I want people to see me standing next to him and him standing next to me. We'll see who's sleepy.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. Thanks for your time. Please come back in less than 13 years, sir.
All right, Chuck. Thank you very much.
All right. It's Chris, but anyway.
Chris. I just did Chris. No, I just did Chuck. I tell you what, man, these are back-to-back. Anyway.
No, it's okay.
I don't know how you do it early in the morning, too.
Safe travels on the campaign trail. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group.
So, Joe Biden there did a pretty good job of answering all of Chris Wallace's questions about the Nelson Mandela arrest fib or exaggeration or whatever it was he was doing on the campaign trail, and then the idea that where he said, I'm Joe Biden, I'm running for U.S. Senate. No, that was a story he was telling about what he used to say in Delaware when he was running for Senate, though he didn't really ask him about the vote for the other Biden, what that was supposed to mean. I think that was just a malapropism, but after Joe Biden did such a great job of answering all the Sleepy Joe questions, and Chris Wallace never said Sleepy Joe, it was actually Joe Biden who mentioned the nickname Sleepy Joe, but then at the very end he had to call Chris Wallace Chuck. And actually that was, of all the clips that Chris Wallace showed, the calling Chris Chuck was, he can't see any of the people interviewing him, Joe Biden, and he did multiple interviews, including one with Chuck Todd, either before or after this one. So, of all the bad things that Joe Biden said, calling Chris Wallace Chuck was actually the least of all of them, but doing it after doing so well and answering the questions, that was... Poor Joe Biden. I don't think he's going to be the nominee. It's looking actually more and more like Bernie Sanders is going to be the Democratic nominee. But what do I know about what's going to happen 2 days from now on Super Tuesday when 34% of the delegates are going to be allocated Next week, we're going to know a lot more, but I'll talk about that more, a little more after we watch a few more clips. I have one more Joe Biden clip. This is Joe Biden talking to Chuck Todd, making his big anti-Bernie Sanders argument, where this is a question that comes up, where he said, we're either going to win big or lose big. That I actually thought Joe Biden made a pretty good speech after his win in South Carolina. I think it was the best speech he's made in the campaign so far, although Bernie Sanders has also made really good speeches in South Carolina, in Nevada, where he's not just doing the same old rhetoric stump speech that he did in 2016, recycled for 2020. He's like saying new things that I haven't heard before. So there's a lot of good speechifying going on. And but this next Joe Biden clip is where he's making his best case against Bernie Sanders, how he's going to lose the House and the Senate. And I don't really buy it, but this is Joe Biden's best argument, talking to Chuck Todd for the final Joe Biden clip from Meet the Press this morning that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Last night you were trying to make this a two-person race. You essentially said you're either going to win big or lose big. And so do you believe Bernie Sanders would lead the Democratic Party to a big loss?
I do. I think Bernie Sanders' position on a number of the issues, even the Democratic Party, are going to be very controversial. The idea that you're going to find $60 billion and not going to raise $1 trillion, I should say, not going to have to raise taxes on middle-class people. The idea that, we're talking about immigration. I mean, if Bernie had voted for if we had passed the immigration bill that I voted for and Teddy Kennedy and others voted for about 10 years ago, we'd already have 6 million people who were undocumented American citizens. I mean, so there's a lot of talk. We're getting down now. Everybody's going to look at Bernie's record as closely as they've looked at mine over the last 5 months. And I think they're going to see some stark differences in where we stand.
On Wednesday morning, if you are behind by a big chunk of delegates, it may be
And that was the last Joe Biden clip. That's his best argument against Bernie Sanders. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, which seems like the most likely outcome of the Democratic nomination process at this point. It looks like Bernie Sanders is going to be the nominee, and it's kind of like a shot in the dark, a Hail Mary pass, as they say, where he's going to lose some people in the middle and gain more people on the fringes, I guess. Or who's the Green Party going to vote for if Bernie Sanders is the nominee? Is he going to pick up all those people who voted for Jill Stein in 2016? That could actually make the difference if you've been looking at the numbers. I looked at, one of the things that happened in 2016 was there was an increase compared to the Obama years. There was an increase in the amount of votes for third-party candidates. That includes Green Party and Libertarian. And if Bernie Sanders can bring back some of those Green Party voters, that might make up for the people who don't vote for him because of his democratic socialism baggage. I don't know. But that was, like I said, the last Joe Biden clip, and now I have a couple Bernie Sanders clips responding to, and in both of these clips, just like Joe Biden went after Bernie Sanders, you're going to see Bernie Sanders go after Joe Biden. And this next clip, this is the only CBS News Face the Nation clip that I'm going to show you. This is Margaret Brennan asking Bernie Sanders about Biden's win in South Carolina. Is he going to be able to blanket the airwaves, how Biden has been on all the Sunday shows. What are you going to do about that? But also talking about the $46 million that Bernie Sanders raised in February, and how that eclipses anything Joe Biden has been able to do. And I like how Bernie Sanders actually talks about not just how much money he has raised, but how he has raised it. That is actually really important, as I will talk about with you after we watch this penultimate newsmaker clip together for tonight over here.
Nomination.
Joe Biden is blanketing the airwaves this morning. We know from your campaign that you raised $46 million in February. That's a significant number. What do you think that does for you going into Super Tuesday? What edge?
Well, Margaret, it is not only the amount of money that we raised, and that is a phenomenal amount. It's how we raised it. We don't have a super PAC like Joe Biden. I don't go to rich people's homes like Joe Biden. I think Joe has contributions from more than 40 billionaires. What we have done is received more campaign contributions from more Americans than any candidate in the history of the United States, averaging $18.50. This is a campaign of working people and by working people, and I'm extraordinarily proud of that. But we have enough money now, not only to take us through Super Tuesday, but take us through the entire process, fueled by the contributions of working class people all across this country.
Your campaign said that if you are the nominee, you won't accept the financial.
So that was Bernie Sanders on CBS News's Face the Nation. And you did hear a couple little shots against Joe Biden in that clip. But the final news clip I want to show you is from ABC News's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where George Stephanopoulos asks a question. You heard Joe Biden say that Bernie's going to mean a loss of the House and the Senate for the Democrats, and a lack of the ability of Democrats to unify. And Bernie Sanders, I think, does a good job of answering those criticisms and throwing in a couple criticisms of Joe Biden for his bad votes in the past, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that final news clip together over here.
This country want to hear discussed.
You've also called yourself an existential threat to the Democratic establishment. I guess that includes House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrats in the House and the Senate. Don't you need their support to win in November? One of the big pitches that Vice President Biden was just making is that he can help make sure the Democrats hold on to the House, take back the Senate, and that you're going to be a burden for House Democrats and Democratic Senate candidates come November.
That's absolutely untrue. The corporate wing of the Democratic Party, a group called Third Way, attacked me, and they said I'm an existential threat to the Democratic Party. And what I said is, yeah, I'm an existential threat to the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. For too long, the Democratic Party and leaders have been going to rich people's homes, raising money, and they've ignored the working class and the middle class and low-income people in this country. That has got to change. We've got to open the doors of the Democratic Party to millions and millions of people who are trying to get by on $12, $13 an hour, who can't afford health care, can't afford child care, who can't afford to send their kids to college. Those are the people we have to start paying attention to. I've known Nancy Pelosi for a very long time. I'm part of the Democratic leadership of the United States Senate with Chuck Schumer. It is my view that every Democratic candidate for president, no matter who wins this nominating process, clearly I hope it's me, we're going to come together because we all understand that Donald Trump is the greatest threat to this country in the modern history of this country, that he's a fraud, that he's a liar, that he's undermining American democracy. We're going to have Democrats coming together, but the trick is which candidate can reach out and bring new people into the political process who can create the excitement and the energy for young people to come in. I think that's our campaign.
The New York Times reported this week that President Obama has told associates that it could be difficult to unify the party if you're the nominee.
I really don't think so. Look, Trump is such a threat to our Constitution, to our way of life, that while Democrats may have differences of opinion, yeah, I have differences with Joe Biden, no great secret. Joe voted for the war in Iraq. Joe voted for a bad bankruptcy bill. Joe voted for bad trade agreements. But at the end of the day, I have known Joe Biden for a very long time. He's a decent guy. I have no doubt that if I win, Joe will be there. If Joe ends up winning, I will be there. We are going to come together, and President Obama, in my view, he has said this, will play a leading role in helping whoever the Democratic nominee is. We are facing in Donald Trump somebody who is a pathological liar, running a corrupt administration. Every Democrat and millions of independents and a number of Republicans understand we cannot have somebody like Trump win re-election.
The president seems to be going out of his way to help you. He had a tweet last night at 11.
So that was the final news clip I wanted to show you, and I think Bernie Sanders did a pretty good job there of refuting the talking points you heard from Joe Biden in the previous clips about losing the House and the Senate under a Bernie Sanders candidacy for president, and also about Bernie Sanders' ability to unify the Democratic Party. I think actually Bernie Sanders is a stronger candidate than Joe Biden. Anyway, like I said, that's the last news clip. I have not been thinking about voting for Joe Biden at any time during this presidential campaign. But like I said at the beginning of my live stream, I have been thinking about voting for Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. Here you can see my ballot that I haven't filled out. Bernie Sanders is he's the second choice. Elizabeth Warren is the second choice from the bottom there. This is my California ballot that I have to fill out and mail in before Super Tuesday, March 3rd, this Tuesday. And like I said, I will be filling out that ballot and showing it to you in less than 24 hours, sometime tomorrow afternoon, Monday afternoon, California time. I've been promising for weeks that I'd let you know who I was going to vote for in the California Super Tuesday primary. As I've mentioned many times before, in 2016 in the primary, I voted for Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton, which I'm proud of that vote, even though I voted for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump in the general election. I'm also proud of that vote. But tomorrow, sometime in the afternoon, I will either be doing a live stream or a video premiere where I announce who I am voting for. I will show you my California ballot here with the bubble filled in either for Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, and I will explain that vote, and I will also tell you the story of how 4 years ago my LiberalViewer channel actually participated in a lawsuit to try to get California to let people broadcast their ballot choices from their polling places or wherever, and that lawsuit failed, but it was only a temporary loss, and California changed the law. And anyway, I'll explain all of that tomorrow in either a video premiere or a live stream sometime in the afternoon California time, when I let you know how I filled in this ballot. And I'm kind of torn because the whole reason that California moved up their primary to March 3rd from June was so people like me would be able to vote for our favorite candidate instead of voting for the person who seemed to be the front runner, because it used to be California was just like endorsing the front runner rather than helping choose who the candidate was going to be. And honestly, I think Elizabeth Warren is the best candidate, but I'm also kind of leaning towards confirming the front runner, Bernie Sanders, who is also the person I voted for in 2016. So let me know down in the video description if you think that I should vote for Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders in the California Super Tuesday primary. Should I vote for who I think is the person that I think is the best candidate, or should I vote for the person who in the Bernie versus Biden contest that apparently is the current framing of the contest based on what happened in South Carolina with their 54 delegates, even though all the delegates that have been allocated in the last 4 contests represent only 4%, and what's going to happen on Super Tuesday is 34%. And actually, California's 415 delegates are more than any of the previous 4 contests. But anyway, you can let me know what you think about all of that. And before I finish, I've got Sandy and Dash have not been fed, so they have been roaming around my area while I've been doing this broadcast. Sandy is right here, like 1 inch away from my finger, and I'm just glad she's not whining the whole time. But for the final clip, I'm gonna give you the Dash and Sandy clip I recorded during my first clip. This is right over to my left over here, Sandy lying down and Dash standing there and turning towards me when I called to him during my first clip, the Saturday Night Live clip. But here is my final Dash and Sandy clip to finish the show over here. I'm trying to play a clip. I'm playing my Saturday Night Live clip. So that's the show. Thanks for joining me. I also appreciate all the super chat contributors during the show. Sexy Bob and Nelson 100, who liked my kind of silly mask that I wore at the beginning of the program. And Lulu Girl showed up. Where were you last week when I wore the peach shirt that you wanted me to wear, Lulu Girl? But I'm out of peach shirts this week. And then Andy M, thank you for that super chat contribution. If you want to support my broadcasts, down in the video description, there are links to PayPal and Patreon, where you can be a monthly supporter on Patreon. That's what I most rely on, are those Patreon supporters. So if you want to support my continued broadcasts, you can do that using those links down in the video description. But anyway, that is the end of the show for this week. Tomorrow, in less than 24 hours, like I said, I will do either a live stream or a video premiere announcing my vote for either Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders in the California primary, and also explaining how 4 years ago, my LiberalViewer channel participated in this lawsuit that tried to give people their First Amendment rights to talk about who they voted for. So that's tomorrow, and then next Sunday and every Sunday for the rest of 2020 at least, I will be back with my LiberalViewer Sunday live clip roundup. And until tomorrow and next Sunday, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.